Romanticism was a movement of literature, art, and cultural attitudes that began in the late 18th century. It was distinguished by a passionate interest in nature, a celebration of individual liberty, and a belief in the power of emotion to promote and justify social changes. The Romantics rejected the rationalism of the Enlightenment and argued that nature, emotion, intuition, and instinct are all valid sources of knowledge that must be honored at least as much as reason or observation. As such, they were a reaction against both the scientific modes of reasoning that came to dominate 18th century philosophy and science, as well as against that century's excessive reverence to reason, especially when used as a rationalization to enact the will of the powerful, reducing the grandeur and the possibility of pure reason sometimes to a trick of language, as a social and political tool, as a tool of repression. Romanticism also rejected what it perceived as the sterile legacy of European classicism in favor of discovering a new world through imagination and feeling, drawing on the common folk culture of pre-classical Europe. While German Romanticism featured a kind of sentimental nationalism that would later be harnessed by sinister forces into proto-fascist inclinations and supremacism, morphing into something even worse, of course, with the rise of the Third Reich, English Romanticism remained relatively pure by comparison, and more concerned with individualism, self-expression, and opportunities for personal immersion in nature. It was fine with most Romantics if the Enlightenment had upended centuries of religious repression, punitive superstition, and the anti-knowledge of the Dark Ages. But Romantics saw a danger in the prospects of Enlightenment thinking replacing one tyranny with another. Instead of everything passionate and natural in a human being getting condemned as sinful, those very same feelings, instincts, and drives would come to be rejected by a new elite as irrational. Swapping out one priesthood for another might amount to no substantial improvement in the dignity of women and men, in the liberty that is to Romantics our birthright. Natural philosophy, as science was first called, might become the new bully, the new dictator, declaring anything it didn't approve of as contrary to reason, order, and progress. The most optimistic thinkers of the Enlightenment saw no reason why moral, aesthetic, and political considerations would not finally yield to a unanimous restructuring and harmonizing of all sentiments and consequent actions under the cool gaze of reason. All facets of human life finally becoming uniform, as neat as Euclidean geometry. This totalizing impulse and its implications seemed as cold as any other circle in hell to the Romantics. It seemed like nothing less than the annihilation of the human. Some confirmation of their suspicions could be found in the way politicians had begun to use the language of reason, order, and progress when merely enacting the will of special interests. Enlightenment rationalism and early scientific inquiry of an empiricist leaning together had dealt a death blow to the steadying influence and, at times, the absolute tyranny of religion as an ordering meta-narrative. And yet, elevated to the status of religion, might not this new reverence for the all-seeing gaze of pure reason prove to be the unholiest tyranny of them all? The Enlightenment and its anointed ones, its prophets of reason, might swap tautological arguments that served narrow agendas for the blind faith doctrines of a previous era to the same effect: control. Although the era of 19th century depth psychology had not yet dawned, the Romantics sensed that Enlightenment thinking might be at war with everything natural that lives in the darker recesses of the psyche, including instinct, intuition, all things conventionally regarded as feminine, as well as that negative capability which is requisite to poetry and artistic creation of every kind. A great deal of what makes us human is, for the Romantics, difficult, if not impossible, to analyze. To the extent these primordial and animating forces may be analyzed, it matters a great deal whether the intent is purely to understand or rather to subjugate them. What it means to be human is forever open to discovery and reinvention. Many of the notions we hold now as commonsensical or incontrovertible to the definition of the human were defined and fought for by the Romantics. For instance, in the arts, we find it perfectly acceptable and normal that paintings and literature should feature and centralize ordinary people with quotidian problems, instead of starting on the lower end with medieval knights who slay dragons, and then proceeding up through kings and queens to the doings of the gods, long before the hooker with the heart of gold could become insufferably tried and stale as a literary concept. Before it could be used at all, the Romantics had to make it acceptable to magnify the lives of people in the lower stations of life, to grant validity to all walks of life in the first place. Art didn't always do that. Art imitates life and vice versa, an endless reciprocal cycle. We moderns find it agreeable and perhaps even necessary that people should marry based primarily upon the passionate attraction of two individuals for each other, while it is still difficult for young couples in love to ignore grave socioeconomic disparities or the extreme misgivings of their parents or the disapproval of their closest friends regarding their choice in a mate. It is not impossible for the passions of the two individuals directly involved to play the largest and the leading role. This too was a project of the Romantics, shedding light upon the easier and more conventional associations. Okay, your Valentine's Day associations with the term romantic, especially when used as a commonplace adjective. Much of what we take as normal or natural to the realm of the human was fought for at one time or another, whether in art, in argument, or in the streets. The Romantics tore down the edifices of older normative beliefs while resisting with considerable suspicion the construction of new forms of tyranny. In the lives of certain fascinating individuals of great intellectual promise, the passage of the entire species from old religious forms of bondage to overzealous optimism in the absolute ascendancy of pure reason, and then finally to a wizened and well-measured variant of romantic individualism, may be observed in miniature. When Jane Clairmont, a single mother of two children, stepped onto the balcony of her new residence and spied upon his own terrace the man next door, she said to him, "Is it possible that I behold the immortal Godwin?" And she did. William Godwin was one such butterfly. In the late Georgian, early Victorian era, who demonstrated in miniature these transformations of a culture and a species, from religion to radical Enlightenment rationalism to something more balanced and integrated on the other side of that, with the religious vestiges finally slipping away in their entirety. His story and the impact it has upon his daughter, the girl who would run away amid grade scandal with a married man, a famous poet, and also the girl who would compose the novel Frankenstein. Both of these things before the age of 20. That's coming next on Hyperion Midnight. Thank you for your kind attention. If you're finding value in this channel, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. All the little things you can do really help out. It is also possible to contribute a one-time donation by PayPal or by making purchases in our online store. These things are both enormously helpful to the life and future of the channel. Links for those things in the description. Until next time, this is Mark Vanderpool for Hyperion Midnight. Per aspera ad astra. Persevere, my friends, and hail New Terra.